Hey folks, welcome to chapter 33 on circulation. All animals must keep their cells supplied with nutrients and oxygen, and all must get rid of cellular waste. Imagine if you couldn't breathe anymore, you wouldn't be able to live. A circulatory system uses a heart to pump substances carried in a fluid transport medium, in this case blood, through a body. Some invertebrates, those are organisms without a backbone, have an open circulatory system. Vertebrates, such as ourselves, have a closed circulatory system in which materials are exchanged across capillaries. The definition of a circulatory system. These are organ systems consisting of a heart or hearts and blood-filled vessels that distribute substances through a body. A heart is a muscular organ that pumps blood through the body, and blood is the circulatory fluid. In vertebrates, blood is fluid connective tissue consisting of plasma and cells that form inside the bone, which you guys had learned about in previous lectures. Open circulatory systems. It's a circulatory system in which blood mixes with interstitial fluid and makes direct exchanges to the cells. A great example would be this grasshopper that you see below. Basically, blood is just going to flow from the heart into the body and eventually make its way back to the heart. A closed circulatory system, such as what we have, is when blood flows through a continuous system of vessels. Substances are exchanged between the blood and cells of other tissues by diffusion across the walls of capillaries. And capillaries are the smallest blood vessels where exchanges with interstitial fluid take place. Imagine capillaries are the tiniest vessels. You usually find them in the tips of your nose, the tips of your fingers, and your toes. The structure of the heart and the circuits through which blood flows vary among vertebrate groups. In fish, blood flows through a single circuit, but over time, evolution of a two-circuit system, a pulmonary circuit and a systematic circuit, accompanied with the evolution of lungs. So most air breathers have two different circuits. The pulmonary circuit is the circuit which blood flows from the heart to the lungs and back. So think about this. If someone has pulmonary disease, that means that blood is not being exchanged from the heart to the lungs and back correctly, and so the body is not getting enough oxygenated blood. Systemic circuit is the circuit through which blood flows from the heart to the body's tissues and back. So pulmonary is blood flowing between the heart and the lungs, and systemic is blood flowing from the heart to the rest of the body. So key concepts. Most animals have a circulatory system that transport materials through the body. In an open system, blood vessels basically just like let blood out into the body where it'll mix with interstitial fluids. And in a closed system such as ours, blood remains in vessels and exchanges substances with cells by diffusion across those vessel walls. So let's talk about the human cardiovascular system. Blood flows through blood vessels in a closed two-circuit circulatory system, and that consists of arteries, arterioles, and veins. Arteries move blood from the heart to the arterioles, or move blood from the heart to the body. The largest artery in the body is the aorta. Arterioles supply capillaries, and capillaries drain into venules that feed into veins, and veins carry blood back to the heart. If you're sitting here being confused by the slide, don't worry, I will make this as crystal clear as possible in the next few slides. So arteries. Arteries are large diameter blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart. So they carry oxygenated blood away from the heart. The aorta is a large artery that receives blood pumped out of the heart's left ventricle. And an arteriole is vessels that carry blood from an artery to a capillary. So basically, the aorta is the largest arteries, and it feeds into other arteries, which then eventually lead to arterioles, and you can see that here. You see that the artery is larger than the arteriole, which then feeds into the capillaries. And the arteries carry oxygenated blood, so they're carrying blood away from the heart and into the body. Veins and venules are vessels that return blood to the heart. So you see here, the blue, the veins are returning deoxygenated blood to the heart. So a venule is just a small diameter vessel, and a vein is a larger vessel. They both carry deoxygenated blood back to the heart. The pulmonary circuit carries blood to and from the lungs. So oxygen-poor blood is pumped out of the heart's right ventricle through pulmonary arteries to the lungs. As blood flows through the pulmonary capillaries, it picks up oxygen and gives up carbon dioxide in the lungs. And then the pulmonary veins return the oxygen-rich blood to the heart's left atrium. The heart's left ventricle pumps blood into the aorta, which branches into arteries and arterioles that carry blood to various parts of the body. So once that blood makes it to the heart and into the aorta, then the arteries are going to carry that oxygenated blood to the rest of your body. So arteries carry oxygenated blood to various parts of the body. Blood gives up oxygen and picks up carbon dioxide as it flows through the capillaries, and oxygen-poor blood leaves the capillaries and flows through the venules and veins to the heart's right atrium. So veins carry oxygen-poor blood. And if you guys watch this video below, it's a really fantastic way that simplifies everything. The heart lies in the thoracic cavity beneath the breastbone and between the lungs. If you remember, this is your thoracic cavity. Here's your diaphragm, and your abdominal cavities below. It's protected and anchored by the pericardium, a double-layered sac of connective tissue, and a layer of fat offers additional protection. The human heart is a double pump partitioned into two halves, each with an atrium above and a ventricle. So the atrium is always at the top and the ventricle is always at the bottom. The atrium is the heart chamber that receives blood from veins, or the top of the heart, and the ventricle is the heart chamber that pumps blood into the arteries, or the bottom of the heart. And the way you remember this is A comes before V, so I always remember atrium's above and ventricle is below. Blood from the right atrium is going to flow through the right atrioventricular valve into the right ventricle. So you have your right atrium, and blood is going to flow through this valve into the right ventricle. The right ventricle is then going to pump it through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary trunk, a vessel that branches into two pulmonary arteries, and this is going to carry this deoxygenated blood to the lungs. Once the lungs oxygenate that blood, the now oxygenated blood returns to the left atrium via the pulmonary veins, and the blood then flows through the left atrioventricular valve into the left ventricle, and the left ventricle pumps the blood through the aortic valve into the aorta, and from there it flows to a tissue of the body. This may sound very complicated, but if you watch this video, you can see it all in action. Basically know that deoxygenated blood is going to come into the left atrium and then flow into the left ventricle, then get pumped to the lungs. Then once that oxygenated blood returns, it's going to enter into the right atrium and then into the right ventricle, where it will get pumped into the rest of the body. These two websites right here are excellent. They both put how the heart pumps blood into the body in song. One's a rap, and I think one is just a regular song. The cardiac cycle. During one cardiac cycle, all heart chambers undergo a rhythmic relaxation called diastole and a contraction, or a systole. You can feel this when you feel for your heart to beat. So the contraction of the ventricles alone provides the force that powers movement of blood through your blood vessels in your body, and contraction of the atria only fills the ventricles. Again, here's a great video of how the cardiac cycle works. Please know that the cardiac cycle is a sequence of contractions and relaxations of the heart chambers that occurs with each heartbeat. Diastole means relaxation phase of the cardiac cycle, or when your heart is not pumping blood out, and systole is when your blood contracts. So if you feel that lub-dub, lub-dub, what you're feeling is your heart contracting and then relaxing. So what should we know? The heart. A human heart is a muscular pump that has 4 chambers. It pumps blood through 2 separate circuits, one to the lungs and back, which is called your pulmonary, and the other to extending through the body, which is systemic. The cardiac pacemaker stimulates heart muscles to contract. Let's talk about the characteristics and functions of blood. Plasma, the protein-rich portion of fluid, distributes essential nutrients and solutes to cells. Blood cells tumbling along in plasma carry oxygen, and other types of blood cells, like your white blood cells, defend the body. The function of the circulatory system is to move blood. Blood carries essential oxygen and nutrients to cells and washes away their metabolic waste. Blood facilitates internal communications by distributing hormones and serves as a highway for cells and proteins that protect and repair tissues. The average size adult holds about 5 liters of blood, more than 10 pints. Blood consists of plasma, blood cells, and platelets. Plasma is mostly water, and platelets and blood cells arise from stem cells and bone, which we had talked about earlier. Plasma consists of about 50 to 60% of the blood volume. Plasma is mostly water with hundreds of different plasma proteins dissolved in it, so it's the fluid portion of the blood. When you spin blood down, the plasma portion is almost always yellow. Red blood cells, also known as erythrocytes, contain hemoglobin that functions in oxygen transport. Erythrocytes transport oxygen from the lungs to aerobically respiring cells and carry carbon dioxide waste from them. The red blood cell erythrocyte is a hemoglobin-filled blood cell that carries oxygen. White blood cells, or leukocytes, have roles in day-to-day tissue maintenance and repair and defense against germs. The way I remember this is that the white blood cells are the ones that are going to fight against viruses and bacteria. And platelets adhere to an injured site and help form a blood clot. Clotting, or hemostasis, stops blood loss from an injured vessel and provides a framework to begin repairs. So platelets are these little cells that are flowing around in your blood, and whenever you get a paper cut, they come together to basically create that scab. And this is a great cartoon explaining that. So platelets are cell fragments that help blood clot, and hemostasis is the process by which blood clots in response to injury, such as a paper cut. So there's a couple steps to hemostasis, or basically the creation of a scab. First, the blood vessel must be damaged, so you need to scrape your knee or cut your finger. Then phase 1, the vessels are going to constrict to slow the flow of blood to the injury site. Then the platelets are going to start to stick together, plugging the site, and then the clot will form. Thick-walled arteries smooth out pressure variations. The bulging of an artery with each ventricular contraction is referred to as a pulse. So if you ever take your pulse, which you can do by taking your 2 fingers to your neck or to your wrist, what you're feeling are your arteries literally expanding and then relaxing with each contraction of the heart. As the artery wall recoils or relaxes, it keeps blood flowing away from the heart. So your pulse is a brief stretching of the arterial walls that occurs when the ventricles in your heart contract. Arteries are large diameter vessels that have a muscular wall reinforced with elastic tissue. So think of them as like very stretchy tubes. In the systemic circuit, the body adjusts the distribution of blood by altering the diameter of your arteries. Smooth muscle that rings each artery responds to commands from the central nervous system. So your central nervous system might tell your arteries to expand more or contract based on the needs of where blood needs to go in your body. Sympathetic stimulation causes something called vasodilation, or widening of the arteries in the extremities, and vasoconstriction, or narrowing of the arteries in the gut. So if the cops are about to pull you over and your heart starts racing, you may start feeling vasodilation or blood start to move to different parts of your body. Blood pressure is pressure exerted by blood against the walls of a vessel that encloses it. Blood pressure results from a force exerted by ventricular contraction. It declines as blood proceeds through a circuit, and it's usually recorded as a systolic pressure over a diastolic pressure. So blood pressure is the pressure exerted by blood against a vessel wall. Systolic pressure is blood pressure when the ventricles are contracting. It's the highest pressure of a cardiac cycle. And then a diastolic pressure is the blood pressure when ventricles are relaxed. That's why when you go to the doctors and you get your blood pressure taken, they always give you 2 numbers. It's usually like 1 something over 78. Blood pressure depends on a couple of things. It depends on the total blood volume, how much blood the ventricles are pumping, and the degree of your artery dilation. And blood pressure is measured in millimeters of mercury, and it's almost always written in systolic value over diastolic value. So normal blood pressure in an adult would be 120 over 80 or some variation of that. Measuring blood pressure. I'm sure you've all had your blood pressure measured at some point, and you guys can watch this video that explains it a little bit better. Basically what the doctor or the nurse is doing is the cuff is inflated with air. Pressure is then released until sounds are heard. Remember, the nurse or doctor is going to put their stethoscope against your arm while they're doing that. And what they're listening to is the systolic pressure. And then the sounds eventually stop as more air is released, which leads to diastolic pressure. We've all heard about hypertension. Hypertension is the inability to regulate your blood pressure and can result in hypertension or an increase in blood pressure. High blood pressure makes the heart and kidneys work harder, increasing the risk of heart disease or kidney failure. Heredity and diet can contribute to risk for high blood pressure. And over here, you guys can see the complications to high blood pressure. That's why the doctors always want you to keep your blood pressure in check. You could lead to brain stroke, vision loss, heart attack, bone loss, kidney failure, and blood vessel damage. Now, we've mentioned capillaries a whole bunch in this lecture so far, and capillaries are literally the smallest vessels in your body. And your body utilizes capillaries, as you can see, like in this human's hand, to slow down the flow of blood. And so, with that slow flow, collective cross-sectional area is far greater than that of the arteriole that deliver blood to them or the veins that carry blood away. So, what that means is, as the capillaries get smaller and smaller, that's going to slow down the flow and allow for the exchange of oxygen into your tissues and waste back into your blood. So, slow flow through narrow vessels enhances the rate of exchanges between blood and interstitial fluid. So, these capillaries are literally so tiny that the blood is going to slow down. The more time blood spends in capillary, the more time there is for exchange to take place. So, oxygen and nutrients can be exchanged between the tissues and the blood. Substances leave a capillary by diffusion. Oxygen, carbon dioxide, and small molecules can diffuse across the capillary cells. Fluid that seeps out of the capillaries at the arterial end is balanced by osmotic uptake of water near the vein end, and normally there's a small net outward flow of fluid from the capillaries. Blood flow keeps cells alive, so disorders that disrupt it have severe impacts on health. Cardiovascular disorders are the leading cause of death in the United States. Fortunately, the risk of many cardiovascular disorders can be lowered by choosing a healthy lifestyle. An example of a cardiovascular issue is rhythms and arrhythmias. Abnormal heart rhythms can slow or halt blood flow. Bradycardia is a below average resting cardiac rate. Tachycardia is a faster than normal heart rate. Atrial fibrillation is an arrhythmia in which the atria do not contract normally, but instead quiver. And ventricular fibrillation can cause death. A defibrillator may reset the rhythm. You commonly hear about rhythms and arrhythmias in student athletes where all of a sudden a student collapses after practice due to an arrhythmia. So what happens is their hearts have an abnormal rhythm and at one point stop. If you've ever heard of ECGs or electrocardiograms, what they do is they use electrodes placed on the chest to monitor electrical activity of the beating heart, and this is a way to figure out if you have an abnormal heart rhythm. If you've ever heard about cholesterol, LDL, and HDL, most cholesterol or lipids in the blood is bound to a protein carrier, such as LDL or HDL. Low-density lipoproteins cause lipid buildup in endothelial linings of arteries. So LDL is the bad fat. And what happens is it can get caught up in the arteries and constrict the flow of blood. HDLs are metabolized by the liver, which uses them for the formation of bile, which we'll discuss about in digestion. Atherosclerosis and heart disease. In atherosclerosis, there's a buildup of lipids, usually based due to high LDL, in the arterial wall that narrows the space between the vessels. So you can see here the buildup of fat. A mass of fibrous connective tissue bulges into the vessel interior, narrowing the diameter. We call these plaques. The hardening plaque can abrade an artery wall, triggering formation of clots, which can lead to heart attack. So basically, you're limiting the blood flow to the heart. Little bits of this plaque can also break off and cause other issues in the body. Atherosclerosis affects vessels that supply blood to the heart muscle. A heart attack occurs when the coronary artery is completely blocked, usually by a clot. And so what happens during a heart attack is that blood does not flow correctly to the heart, and then parts of the heart muscle actually die. Doctors use something called coronary bypass surgery to fix this. So what they do is to divert blood around a clogged coronary artery. Doctors will open a person's chest and insert a blood vessel from somewhere else in their body, usually their leg vein, and what they do is they basically reroute the blood to the correct parts of the heart. There's also something called angioplasty. Doctors can insert a balloon into your blood vessels, and then what they do is they will inflate that small balloon into the blocked artery to flatten out the plaques, which will hopefully allow for more blood flow to various parts of your body. Risk factors for heart disease include smoking, family history, hypertension, which would be high blood pressure, high cholesterol level, diabetes, obesity, age, physical inactivity, and gender. So, cardiovascular disease. Circulatory function declines when the heart's rhythm is disrupted or blood vessels become clogged by atherosclerosis. Heart disease arises when vessels that supply blood to heart muscles are narrowed, and a healthy lifestyle can lessen the risk of cardiovascular disorders. These are your student learning objectives, or what you should make your study guides out of. And these are your key terms. Thank you.